If you can talk about some of the major challenges that either you or the customers face when it comes to service broker integration with Kubernetes operators.
Sure. Look, the overall challenge is that a Kubernetes operator presents a interface for the application developer using Kubernetes to create data service instances. The way operators work is that they provide two things in order to accomplish that. The first would be a custom resource definition, and the second would be a corresponding controller. So if you're talking to Kubernetes and, for example, you specify a stateful set, you create a specification on how the stateful set should look like. Well, often you make that as a YAML description file. For example, naming how many replicas you want in the stateful set and describing the pod template you want to be used when starting pods in the stateful set. Also specifying the persistent volumes and so on. So if we're dealing with data services, it is very likely that we are using stateful sets underneath. But we also have to express the data service specific settings. For example, whether, let's take Postgres for an example, or whether you want to have Postgres 11 or Postgres 12 as your version. Now, what operators usually do is they provide a custom resource definition, which means that you teach Kubernetes a new data structure, a new kind, so to say, which could be called Postgres. And in the corresponding controller, you take the specification of such an object that users can now create. So you can create a Postgres object using the kubectl command, for example. And in the controller, this will be translated, this specification, let's say a Postgres object version should be 12, will be translated into a service and a stateful set, for example. So that will be the Kubernetes side of things. At the end of such an operator, Kubernetes application developers have the opportunity to write a specification, let's say for Postgres objects, that will then instantiate and generate corresponding services and stateful sets, so to say, implement the database service instance. Now, if you want to integrate that with Cloud Foundry, you have to provide, as I mentioned earlier, a service broker. Now, the question is, how do you do that? And the major challenge here is to provide a mapping between the information provided by the Cloud Foundry user and translate that into such an object specification that will be understood by the operator's controller to then translate this request into an actual data service instance. Now, there are some problems underway. One of which is that neither Kubernetes nor many operators do have a concept of a service binding. So, well, you have to find and bridge that gap somehow.